Welcome everyone back to this wonderful channel. Today I'm going to do something called cognitive biases. So you all must be wondering what cognitive biases are in case you do not know. Before I go on to describe what it is, just a disclaimer. There is going to be some tapping. Okay, so cognitive biases are mental shortcuts our brains use that can sometimes lead to errors in thinking and decision making. These shortcuts help us make quick decisions, but they can also cause us to overlook important information or make irrational choices. So I'm going to be describing some cognitive biases in this video today. But first, I will do some tracing, and tapping. Okay, so COGNITIVE cognitive biases. First of all, I will describe some biases and give examples with them as well to better explain the type of bias. Okay, so the first one that I have is called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. To quote an example, a person who believes in a particular conspiracy theory may focus only on information that supports that theory and ignore evidence that disproves it. So, in this example, we are not seeking out objective facts. We tend to be interpreting information to support our existing beliefs. And we can only remember details that uphold our belief, therefore ignoring the other data that challenges our belief system. Okay, now the next example is anchoring bias. So in this one, basically the reliance is on the first piece of information that is encountered when making decisions. So the first piece of information acts as an anchor. An anchor is something that lets you know where your initial position was, where you set off your ship, for example. So in this example, if a car dealer first shows you an expensive car, the price of that car will serve as an anchor, making other cars seem cheaper by comparison, even if they are still expensive. And as you can see, the initial price of that car is $30K, but when they put it on discount, they showed that the initial price was $60K. Now on discount it is $30K, even though it is the same price as it was initially. But you would feel like you want to buy it as you are getting a great deal. The next example that I have is for hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to see events as having been predictable after they have already occurred. To quote an example, before exam, you may feel like I should study these topics they might be asked in the exam. After exam, when a certain topic has appeared in the exam, you feel like I knew that question will come in the exam. I should have studied it. So you feel like this event was predictable that the question was going to come in the exam. After your exam, a lot of these times when we say that I knew this was going to happen, that is hindsight bias. The next one I have is self-serving bias. This one is the tendency to attribute positive outcomes to one's own actions and negative outcomes to external factors. So, in this example, you might attribute your wins to your character, such as if you win a game of tennis. But if you fail it, you will attribute your failures to the external situation. You might think that the empire was unfair, or you were having a bad day that time. So, similarly, we do this in exams as well. A student who does well on a test may attribute their success to the intelligence and hard work, the internal attributes, but if they do poorly, they might blame the teacher or difficulty of the test. Next one I have is availability heuristic. So, heuristics are basically a rule of thumb. Heuristic is something that is influenced by culture. This is the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events based on their availability in memory. So, there are things that are happening in the world, and there are things on the news. And if you're focusing only on the things on the news, that is just one perception of that bigger picture. You are looking at a very small example, small aspect of that bigger picture. So, for example, after seeing news reports about airplane accidents, people might overestimate the danger of flying, despite statistical evidence showing that it's safer than driving. The next example I have is overconfidence bias, the tendency to overestimate one's own abilities, knowledge, or predictions. Investors might be overly confident in their ability to pick stocks, leading to excessive trading and poor returns. In this example, you can see the person A says, I told you to reschedule the installation date. Person B says, that conversation never happened. Maybe you planned to say it, and then the thought morphed into a false memory. I'm sure I emailed you. You might want to pick a defense that's less checkable. Well, he's a smart one. So this is more overconfidence on person's A side. Next one I have is framing effect, which is the way information is presented that can significantly affect decisions and judgment. For example, people react differently to something depending on the framing of an item. It can be both positive or negative. So if it says 80% lean on the beef, people will like it, but 20% fat will be less appealing to the customers. Why? It is because although it is the same thing, there's 80% lean and the rest 20% is fat, but people will think cognitively on the first thing that they see rather than looking at the different layers behind it. So people are more likely to choose surgery with a 90% survival rate than one with a 10% mortality rate, even though the statistics are absolutely identical. Okay, the next example that I have is sunk cost fallacy. It is the tendency to continue investing in a decision based on the cumulative prior investment, that is time, money, or resources, despite new evidence suggesting that it may not be the best course of action. For example, continuing to repair an old car because a lot of money has already been spent on it, even though buying a new car might be more economical in the long run. So, similarly, over here, a person says if we don't get rid of the anchor, the ship will sink. No, the anchor was very expensive. So sometimes when we buy something very expensive, we do not want to get rid of it because we invested a lot of money in it. And that is why you feel like you have to stick with a certain decision in life as well, even though it might be a bad one. Can be a relationship as well. You might have invested a lot in a relationship, and that is why you feel like you want to stay with that person, even though they are not good for you. The next example I have is called the bandwagon effect. Bandwagon is like a vehicle in which a lot of people can fit. It is a tendency to adopt beliefs or actions because many other people are doing so. So, if many people are sitting in a bandwagon going somewhere, that shows that they, the many people are of a certain belief, they are in a particular bandwagon, and you would feel like you have to give in to the societal norm or perception because more people are driven by a certain ideology. For example, buying a new gadget because it's popular among friends, even if it's not particularly useful or needed. So, the next example I have is of Dunning-Kruger effect. It is the tendency for people with low ability in a task to overestimate their ability, while experts may underestimate theirs. As you can see, there is first a very high confidence level and low competence level. Of course, I know everything, but then it gradually starts to slide down. Then you feel like, oh, is there more to it than I thought? Then you think, I may not understand this. And then you feel like as your competence increases, your confidence level might decrease because you are coming closer to reality. Then you think it's finally starting to make some sense. And as your confidence increases, your confidence will also increase. Was it easy? Complicated. So, this is what happens when you are learning a new skill or you are learning something new. And to quote an example, a novice or a beginner chess player might believe they are much better at the game than they actually are, while a grandmaster might underestimate their skill because they are aware of the complexity of the game. When you are an expert in something or a professional, you will feel like you will also know other professionals in your field and have very tough competition. So, but when you are new and you are learning, you might feel like, oh, I can do this and I could do it because you do not have all the knowledge of the things in that particular field. The next example that I have is in group bias. The tendency to favor members of one's own group over those in other groups. A sports fan might believe their team's players are better and more virtuous than players on the other team. So, in group is some preferential treatment that is reserved for those who are considered a part of the in group. When you have a group of friends at school, you will likely not want someone else to come into your group and have some advice for them. And when someone is trying to come into your group, it might get hard for them, but don't do that. Let them in. Don't don't be rude towards someone. So the other person might think, why don't they let me in? The next example I have is negativity bias. Very simple. You tend to give up more weight, you tend to give more weightage to negative experiences than positive ones. This is very common in the YouTube or content creation world, I feel. You might always remember a single piece of criticism more vividly than numerous compliments. So, people on the internet, when they get a lot of negative comments as well, creators, and although there might be a lot of positive things, but if you get one negative one, you may think a lot about it and let it affect you. So always look at the positive compliments more. Next example I have is gambler's fallacy. It is the belief that past random events can influence the outcome of future random events. A coin toss is a good example of it. Believing that a coin toss is more likely to land heads after several consecutive tails, despite each toss being independent. So, if you had heads first and heads 4 times in a row, you might think that you will get tails later. And I think this happens a lot in life as well. If you have several negative experiences, you can have this tendency that to think that, oh, maybe the next one will be negative as well. So the next example in the type that I have is representative heuristic. This is a tendency to judge the probability of an event based on how much it resembles the typical case. So in this example, the person says, I'd like to talk to the doctor. I am the doctor. You don't look like a doctor. There may be some gender biasness here. And even though the person is wearing a coat, the patient thinks that she is not a doctor. Similarly, some people assuming that people who dress in a suit and carries a briefcase is a businessman, regardless of other evidence. So the next example I have is optimism bias. Just like negativity bias, there is optimism bias as well. You can be too positive as well. It is the tendency to overestimate the likelihood of positive outcomes and underestimate the likelihood of negative ones, believing that you are less likely than others to experience negative events like illness or accidents. I have a very good example here. When you begin something, you go on a journey to do something like learn a skill, this is what your expectations are. You may think there are no hindrances on the way. However, this is the reality. When you begin your journey, you see that there are a lot of hurdles that come in your way, and you have to learn by trial and error. And you are experiencing new things for the first time. So you are learning the obstacles on the way and overcoming it. That is the journey of life. And I think that this is the journey that I am on right now. So if you have made it to the end of the video, thank you for that. And I will come back with more such content. Subscribe.